Bear on, Bears fans. Another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast coming your way. Pat, the designer, Courtney Cronin, 2 days down, 2 Chicago Bears press conferences with Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles. And I'm not going to lie to you, Courtney, after Ben Johnson's response to me today, I'm ready to run through a wall. I just need to know where the nearest one is. We are getting a fired up, confident Chicago Bears team. And I mean, listen, we always talk about that with these press conferences, but dare I say, they feel like, no, it's just about the work that we're going to put in. Not that we got to show you, we got to show ourselves what we're going to get done here.
They feel like they nailed it. I think there's a confidence that comes across from the general manager and the head coach that they had clear priorities for free agency and they check their boxes. And not that they don't have that every year. Like, they go in, they build their needs with free agency meetings starting at in December. And then it becomes, well, who's going to be available? What scenarios can the team go through to plan for who they're going to add to the roster? And then it's the draft and all of that. But in years past, they had a lot of different holes that they had to fill. There were 3 very clear needs from left guard all the way to right guard. And then there was a very clear need opposite Montez Sweat. And then you throw in the depth at defensive tackle. And they're like, hey, that's 5 players right there that we identified as being upgrades for what we want to do in 2025. And they're feeling themselves right now. They feel very confident that at least at March 13th, they've addressed the needs that they very clearly identified as the biggest ones. And they got the players that they wanted to. And I think the trades speak to that because they were aggressive in going after players that they knew would be better suited for them financially and from a scheme standpoint than going after and overpaying for guards that they just probably felt that would have been an overpay. And I think you got to credit them. You got to credit that mentality because it's a no delay sort of mentality. It's not, let's try to get a guy who played left guard and make him play center, or somebody who has the position flexibility that he can do multiple things, but he's not elite at one thing.
Yeah.
They went after, like, they simplified it. And that's a big part of this free agency strategy for the Bears in building everything around Caleb Williams. It's still about the quarterback, but trying to get the best fits here and not make it overcomplicated in the process.
Yeah, we got to talk about that. You mentioned Caleb Williams, and we got to dive into why now it is just about Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams. Show us what you got. We do have to tell you guys the Chicago Bears podcast is brought to you by the Advantage Dealer Group. Find your next Chevy, Toyota, or Acura and drive off in under 60 minutes, or they'll make your first car payment. Make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe to the page. Leave a 5-star review. Y'all know what to do. Let's start it here, Courtney, because I like the direction that you're taking us there with the Caleb Williams take, right? And over the last couple of days, what was your biggest takeaway from these 2 press conferences? You mentioned the confidence that they come with, Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles sitting up there. I love the fact that when Ben Johnson's saying we want aggressive, dirty players on the offensive line, Ryan Poles is sitting there trying to hold back a smirk. Shout out to whoever zoomed in on that video. But what was your takeaway from almost this, I don't want to say this overconfidence, but this air of like, once we get to the field, then you'll see everything we're talking about, that I felt like almost everyone exuded?
There's 2 things. Number one, it's the Bears were able to affirm how big of a draw Caleb Williams is in getting the type of people that they want in the building into Halas Hall. Started with Ben Johnson back in January, Caleb Williams, and a 23-year-old quarterback going into year 2, a blank slate, more or less, that you have with a player who is as talented as Caleb Williams is. That's a draw to get Ben Johnson in the building. He could have gone anywhere. He was one of the top head coaching candidates in this cycle. He had his pick of a couple different teams. He chose the Bears in large part because of Caleb Williams. And number 2, it's that the Bears feel, we've done our part now. Caleb, the onus is on you to make the jump in year 2. We have surrounded you with the resources and the tools you need to be successful. Now you got to show that you can make hay with what we've given you. Yeah. And that Caleb in year 2, for as much as he's got a lot of growing to do, he's going to be in a new offense. He's going to have new players around him. That's going to be the same, probably, more off seasons than not. but he's got to show that he is talented enough and that he's capable of taking what the Bears have given him and making the most out of it, and that like doing his own part to facilitate his growth in his second season. Those are, I think, the biggest takeaways that you have from a team that's like, all right, we've rolled up our elbows, we've, gotten in the weeds, we've found the right players, we found the right fit, we found the right scheme. Caleb, like, you got next. It's on you to be able to take everything that we've done and now do your part with it to be a successful quarterback.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think Caleb Williams, there's a lot of steps that he has to take, and for all the deficiencies that we saw around him last year, especially on the offensive line, and not to say it's going to be a perfect product immediately, but there is a part of that is Caleb Williams that needs to go, hey, look, I need to get rid of the ball quicker. I need to trust that whatever the play that Ben calls, whatever he says we need to get accomplished on this play, that's what I'm looking to accomplish. Maybe we don't need a home run ball here. Maybe I don't need to extend the play with my legs. There are going to be moments where those things come in, but I think that's going to be very key to this second year for Caleb Williams and for Ben Johnson, because I love how he said it today. This is not going to be an easy process. It's going to be a hard process. He was talking about the offensive line specifically and them gelling together, but when you look at it with Caleb Williams, there is going to be that part of the process where you have to build trust between the quarterback and the head coach where, hey, if I call the play, I know what I'm looking at. And I don't know if Caleb had that last season.
No, and I think the different play callers, the different ideas of like, what do you think I should do to be successful doesn't match up with what I think I need to do to be successful. In a young quarterback, when you're swimming with like so much information, you kind of need to be told, this is what you're doing. These are the players in front of you. You have talent in front of you. Like there will never, Pat, be the excuse of, like the offensive line, just talent deficient. You've got bargain bin free agents. You've got guys playing out of position. You've got depth issues, which of course depth always takes a hit. That's why you cross-train players. But like the excuses that were given to Caleb last year, well, a lot of them are going to be null and void this season, because you have a better offense, an offense that worked in Detroit that feels like you can take a robotic quarterback, if that's what you want to call Jared Goff, if you want like somebody who like will follow the directions to a T and color inside the lines. Caleb's a color outside of the lines sort of quarterback. So there's going to be moments where he's going to want to improvise, moments where he's going to want the home run play, moments where he's probably going to be pressing, and that's got to stop. Like that's got to get broken. And I think that what the Bears are hoping for is that you have an offensive line that's going to buy him time. What we've seen with Joe Thuney specifically, what we've seen with Patrick Mahomes over the last 4 seasons when Thuney was in Kansas City, is a quarterback who had a lot of time to throw in the pocket. And Mahomes, not that he and Caleb are the same, but like they like to improvise. They like to make the off schedule plays and, get outside of structure. Like Mahomes, when he was throwing for is 4+ seconds, kind of like bringing up the stat that you brought about how Caleb actually did have a lot of time, significantly. But when Mahomes had 4+ seconds to hold on to the ball, he had 393 pass attempts over the last 4 years. Only player in the league with at least 350 of those pass attempts in that situation. In that same stretch, so the 4 years, there were 11 quarterbacks who were sacked more than him. He was sacked 117 times, which really isn't that bad under those circumstances where you're holding onto the ball, you're more susceptible, you're more vulnerable to hits. He had a 32% pressure percentage, which is like right in the middle of the league. That's 16th. So very clearly, the Bears see that and they're like, all right, well, we know that Caleb, we're not going to try to break everything that he does and break his habits. Like that's what makes him special, when he's able to go off schedule and run around, get outside of the pocket, make all these incredible plays. They don't want to coach that out of him. They just want to have better insulation for him so he can be successful in those moments. But it's going to be on Caleb too. When I keep saying the onus now shifts to the quarterback, he's got to find times where don't look for the home run play. Sometimes just take the easy completion. Sometimes you got to throw it away. Like when Caleb last year was making that impassioned plea that not all of the sacks that he took, the 68, the league high, not all of them were on the offensive line. He called the sacks he took, he's like, I've taken stupid sacks. Like he said that multiple times. I know that was his way of trying to be a leader and take the heat off of his offensive line. Some of it's on them. So a lot of it's on the quarterback. There's plenty of blame to go around, but the Bears brass looked at the situation and said, No, like we're assigning blame effectively to the 3 guys that we had on the interior. That's why they made the massive upgrades that they did. But now, like, all of the excuses of, well, like Caleb doesn't have enough time, and the pass protection's terrible. Like that goes out the window when you get into the season. And of course, to go back to your point on what Ben Johnson was saying, it's not going to be easy. You flip the entire interior of your offensive line. That's 3 new players. No, it's not going to be easy. Like all of a sudden everybody's going to gel right away. Like I would imagine that because you have experienced players and you have 2 guards on either side of a center who's experienced, but a center who might be slightly undersized for some of the gap scheme stuff that they want to do. Because there are a lot of complicated run schemes specifically in this offense, but even like with pass protection, you're insulating. You've got a plan for how you're going to make this work with the 3 guys that you have made upgrades with along the interior of the offensive line. And it makes sense that they're pumped about that because they're like, look, all of this stuff should work. Now it reflects on the quarterback. Can you make what you need to make work within the structure that we've given you? And I think they feel confident betting on the fact that they've got the right situation for him now that they didn't have last year.
Yeah, that's what it all comes down to, right? Having the right situation for Caleb to be that guy. One, to have the trust that Ben Johnson is going to call the right play for him, but 2, also to know, the one thing I'll give credit to Pat Mahomes on, and he's always the guy that I point to when I say, listen, guys, we live in an NFL where quarterbacks do hold on to the ball a little bit longer. It's just that's the reality of this league. But the thing that I love about Pat Mahomes is usually when Pat Mahomes is breaking down and trying to break contain and trying to get outside, it's usually because the play has broken down. Sure. It's usually because something has come through on the offensive line or because the receiver that he was supposed to hit is covering. And so now he has to create time and space for Travis Kelce to do whatever the heck he does to get open, right? Like those are the things where Caleb Williams is going to be such an asset for Ben Johnson because you couldn't get as much of that with Jared Goff. There was some of that, but I think a lot more of it was traditional quarterback play with Jared Goff. With Caleb, you can get more of the all-schedule things, and it's just about choosing the right moments. I think that's going to be the most important part of this, and I think Ben Johnson said as much over the last couple of days talking about just how he wants to coach this team and how he wants to get his message across with all of these new players coming in is, we want to make sure that everybody's just focused in enough early in the season. He's not talking about the season. He's talking about spring. He's talking about training camp. He's talking about OTAs, all of that, where it's like, that's where we got to get this right. And I love hearing that early on.
Yeah. And it's the right approach for somebody who's going to be installing a new offense and knowing that he's asking a lot of these players. And, it was a draw for free agents that signed here. Of course, like Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson didn't really have a say because they were traded and we couldn't really, determine, like, were you given destinations, like, that would,
Joe
kind
Thuney
of
seemed like he was done talking the second he showed up here. Like, I don't need the cameras.
We don't know, like, if there were like preferential, like, trade destinations. Like, Jonah Jackson was given permission to go seek a trade. It was different for Thuney, who, I'm imagine like he probably didn't think that he was going to be traded, considering they just, lost the Super Bowl and the offensive line is incredibly important to the success in Kansas City, as we saw from what happened when it got blown up in the Super Bowl. But like, nonetheless, like, you have players coming in who are going to, like, they're excited about the prospect of playing in an offense that can score 30 or 40 a game. The scheme at least has proven what Ben Johnson did in Detroit, like, not necessarily the Chicago Bears. We have no clue. This team scoring 30 points a game would have been like just almost unheard of last year when you think of like some of the struggles of this offense. But that's something that takes time. You don't just walk in day one in spring and be like, all right, yeah, everything's together. Like, this is an offense that's going to be, going blow for blow every single drive and putting up, 7 at the end of each drive. Like, there's going to be a learning curve there. There's going to be a learning curve still for Caleb Williams. It's just that the Bears have tried to like soften that curve with some of the key acquisitions that they made. And they just were such easy, blatant, like, I feel like Drew Dalman was the worst kept secret that he was going to be coming to the Chicago Bears. And I know that because Twitter was down on Monday, it was like, when is it happening? But it was one of the first moves that once that legal tampering window opened, we heard about. And that's a good thing that it's like the Bears didn't overthink it. They, and what Ben Johnson said today about the importance between that center and quarterback
Yeah.
connection, like it's critical for for Caleb. If you don't want to like overwhelm your quarterback and have him in a situation where he's doing too much, having a veteran center who's experienced, who has done this now with another rookie quarterback. He did it with Michael Penix to a degree last year, even though Kirk was the primary starter. And Drew was limited to 9 games because of the ankle injury. He's got experience with another young quarterback. It's not like he's somebody who's only played with a veteran who was kind of like, like a turn it on autopilot sort of QB.
Right.
He knows what it's like to have to over communicate, to have to like take things off of the quarterback's plate, whether it's the snap count, whether it's setting certain protections. He knows that like that's going to fall on me. And that's a good thing because that means that the quarterback's freed up to do other stuff that he's got to focus on, which will then in turn make him a better player, which then in turn will help the offense. So I think just in terms of identifying the right sorts of fits with these veteran players that became available and those that they had to trade for, I think like from a personnel standpoint of like getting guys who have like the football intelligence to surround your quarterback with. What did Ben Johnson keep saying about the interior on the offensive line? You want smart, dependable players. Yeah. That's at least what you think you have with a guy that started 40 games for him when he was the offensive coordinator in Detroit at left guard. That was Jonah Jackson. Joe Thuney's resume speaks for itself. And then Drew Dalman. And the idea that like you have a guy who's not playing out of position, who is a true center.
Yeah.
And it was the best center available in free agency.
Yeah, listen, and that's the thing about all the moves that were made. I think not only did you add the IQ to this team that a young quarterback needs, like we put so much on these young guys when they come into the league and we look at Pat Mahomes, we go, wow, he really hit the ground running. And you don't talk about the fact that offensive line was already in place and there were people who were already used to going and competing for AFC championships on that offensive line, right? And then of course you have to rebuild it down the line, but by then Pat's kind of figured it out. There's so many things that a young quarterback needs more than just, hey, I've got weapons to throw this thing to. And it seemed like at every turn, Caleb Williams wasn't given that last season. It's good to see the change coming this season. But I think on top of that, Courtney, I talked about this yesterday with J-Mac, right? When you get this vibe from the two of the guys that were brought in here that we've talked about, Joe Thuney and Grady Jarrett, that they're not just coming here because they're talented players. The vibe that I get is you've got now proven leaders on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And that's something that I think Caleb Williams needs the most of coming into this season, because Caleb talked about it a couple of times last season, right? Where there were moments where he was like, I don't know if I should do this. I don't know if I should, I mean, should I call timeout here? I feel like we should, but that's not my call to make. Having a veteran offensive lineman in there to go call it. Like things like that are very underrated, where it's like you just have to have somebody who has that confidence in you to make the right decision. And I think that you'll have that now with Joe Thuney on the offensive side and adding Grady Jarrett on the defensive side for similar things.
They needed alphas, and it's not that they don't have leadership. It's not that like the players that they had last year weren't, can't do it, but it is kind of telling that you had 8 captains last year, none of whom came from the offensive line or the defensive line. Grady Jarrett and like what he said about Caleb, like he's a defensive player and he hit free agency for the first time ever. He had like a couple hours to figure out what the heck he was going to do. And he decided to come to Chicago. Obviously it's got to be the right scheme fit. It's got to be the right pay. It's got to be the right place for you to continue your career as a defensive player. But I believe him when he said that Caleb factored into that. You want to, if you want to, like, you're 32 years old, however many more years you want to do this, like whatever your trajectory is, you probably don't want to waste time not being on a winning team. So to be at a place where the quarterback trajectory is clearly pointing in one direction, that reflected upon him and his decision to choose the Bears over whatever other team was available to him. And he kind of like couched that with like, I don't want to talk about any other teams. Like I'm here in Chicago. That's where my focus is. But I imagine that the Bears were not the only team that was in on Grady Jarrett once he got surprisingly released. But it's, the leadership there for a group that lacked it last year up front. I think is critical to the success of the defense. Like he'll probably be the captain of that defensive line, and Joe Thuney will be the captain of that offensive line. I know Ben Johnson said that Drew Dalman will be the quarterback of the offensive line. He has to be. That's what the center is. The center has to know all the protections. You need to know what all 4 other offensive linemen are doing, what the communication with the quarterback, the snap count, all of that. But to have Thuney,
Coleman Shelton was last year as well, but
BC was
the
the
blocking
center.
part was difficult
for sure. And Joe Thuney can be your alpha. Joe Thuney can be your leader up front. Joe Thuney can be the guy who, like I have the institutional knowledge. I've been doing this since 2016. I'm 32 years old. I know what I'm doing, Caleb. Trust me, follow me. It's pretty easy to follow a guy that's coming off 2 all-pro seasons back to back. And, on top of that, not for nothing, but like I still think back to that Patriots game where there were times when Caleb was sacked 9 times where he's laying on the ground by himself. And it's like, that was something that bothered Ryan Poles when he talked about, and it wasn't just specifically that game. I remember he talked about it at other points.
The Arizona game, he doesn't get picked up. The Washington game, he doesn't get picked up.
And it wasn't Poles specifically speaking to that, but I know in the past he has talked about how much it irked him seeing Justin Fields laying on the ground without your quarterback rushing to without your offensive line rushing to the aid of the quarterback. And, maybe that's just a personality thing that didn't work yet. You don't have like the nasty edge up front with the last group. What they're hoping for is that you do have it with these 3 specifically, and that can flip the mentality of that group to be, a progressive, like attacking unit versus like a reactionary, which is never what the offense should be. They should be the ones setting the tone. And I think you set the tone up front. That is literally the biggest cliche in football. And, that's what they're hoping for.
Yeah, Courtney, I think that's massive. Me and J-Mac talked about that yesterday as well, right? That is massive because we talk about that trust that's built that a play is going to work, that I'm going to be able to allow my receiver to get open. That trust starts with, hey, if I'm knocked on my butt, come get me. And I don't have to reach up and all of a sudden I look over. I don't know. I don't even remember who the player was that ended up picking him up. But Caleb kind of did the like, yeah, get out of here. I don't need your help with it. But like,
it might have been Matt Pryor or Tevin Jenkins, one of the 2.
Well, I mean, one of the Bears players came, but one of the defensive players came to help him up because none of the Bears
players. No, I'm talking. I know you're talking about the defensive lineman for the Patriots.
Yeah,
that was a bad look.
Like it's those are the things where it's like, I can't even trust you to pick me up off of the ground after you effed up your job. How am I going to trust you to do your job? And I think that's the massive part where coming in, I love how Ben Johnson said, right, those high IQ guys, the guys that have done this before, the experience, the veteran leadership in the locker room, that's going to be something that you're bringing in guys that are setting a culture, not just for this season. Like to me, a Joe Thuney is somebody who he's going to be someone who teaches Drew Dalman, maybe not Drew Dalman as much and Jonah Jackson, but the young guys that are probably going to have to come in here eventually to take over on some of these other spots on the offensive line. This is how you treat your quarterback. This is how you protect your quarterback. Same thing with Grady Jarrett on the other side. This is how you attack this. This is how you do these things. I think that leadership is going to be so key, not just for these couple of seasons that maybe these guys are here, but that's how you set a foundation for the long term of your team.
Yeah. And that's the leadership that they just didn't have yet that I think will be built now over time.
Yeah.
It's important. Like those are not things that you can just really look past. You know what I mean? Like stuff where it's like, talented enough players will get it done regardless of whether the vibe is good up front. I think that it all kind of goes.
That last year with AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts.
The talent part meeting the leadership expectations, meaning the type of players that you bring in here. You're no longer saying that you can cut it like just kind of like, put a Band-Aid over a bigger problem, which means they didn't go bargain bin hunting. They didn't go trading, and I know like they traded a 6th-round pick for Jonah Jackson. They traded a 4th-round pick for Joe Thuney. But these were proven players. Yeah. Ryan Bates, like I don't even want to have that conversation anymore because that's a very different conversation to where the Bears, like, why were you after that guy for so long? Like, what did he, they went after proven players is what I'm trying to say. They're not, And yes, I know Jonah Jackson had a rough year. He did end up getting benched, but like Ryan Bates in the MO, and I'm not trying to pick on this guy, but like the MO for him was that this is a guy that Buffalo like had benched, several times, and you think that's an upgrade. No, like they have a guy who started all those games, 40 when Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator. I believe it was 57 total during his time in Detroit at left guard. And a couple at right guard. Like that's a proven starter. Joe Thuney is a proven starter.
Yeah.
Drew Dalman is a proven starter. You don't have guys who like were just on the cusp of becoming starters. Like you have more. No one's really a polished product, probably outside of Thuney, but like you have more polished products there that you expect to like yield a pretty big benefit. Right away.
100%. Very exciting couple of days here, especially being up at Halas Hall. The food was upgraded as well. Shout out to the food being upgraded. We had pizza today, Courtney, a Lou Malnati's action. So shout out to that from the Chicago Bears. But I thought something else that was interesting that came down the pipeline today. Bears making a couple of signings here. Olamide Zaccheaus got signed today. The wide receiver 3 position, essentially, I would assume, is now locked up here in Chicago. And the Bears also re-signing Steven Carlson, which is listen, they're holding on to some of the tight ends here. When you hear Zaccheaus' name come across, I remember him in that Bears game last year versus Washington, and actually a couple of games versus the Bears here over the last few years. It just feels like he's kind of walking right into the starter role as that wide receiver 3.
Yeah,
right?
slot receiver. I think he did a really nice job for Washington last year and kind of what was a bounce back year for him. Like major hustle guy, tough effort guy. I know that like the feeling that I've got like just last couple, the last hour or so is from talking with people in Washington is that they were surprised that they didn't keep him because of what he, meant to Jaden Daniels and the growth. And I mean, they didn't have a lot of depth at receiver. So that I think is something that factors into, it was like Terry McLaurin and like everybody else. I think Zaccheaus was the number 3 receiver behind Zach Ertz, who's a tight end. But like good hands, like, good, you can use him in the backfield sometimes. I think for a slot receiver, the number 3 guy, like it's very clear what your top 2 guys are in Rome and DJ. This is nice depth for them to get in the second wave of free agency without overpaying. Yeah, and a young player too.
And that's the thing, a young player. And I know a lot of people are going to look at this and say, well, it had a bounce back season last season, but at the same time, I would still go out in the draft and find a guy to possibly take on that role as well. I don't think that option's closed. Ryan Post talked about that, the flexibility that the Bears are going to have in the draft because of the signings that he's making now in the free agency market. But I do think I look at a signing like Zaccheaus on a bounce back season, and then I look over at the fact that Antoine Randall is here, and I'm like, oh. Yeah. Remember what he did with Tim Patrick? Remember how he kind of brought those guys along who you were like, all right, it dealt with some injury. He's probably kind of done. Actually, he becomes a pivotal part in a lot of those Detroit games last season. Can we see some of that this season with Zaccheaus now being on the roster?
Yeah, I think that's like the Antoine Randall connection there too, of like Ben Johnson. In the process, he's talked about the last 7 weeks or so being in the Bears building, working with his staff, and then like his staff melding with Ryan Pohl's staff of like identifying the players that they want. They wanted to get younger at receiver. It's why, there was never really any thought to bringing Keenan Allen back, especially at that price. I don't know, like maybe the veteran market feels like it's real slow right now. So who knows where some of these guys go. But I think giving Caleb Williams another, like, this speaks to like the exact same thing that we started talking about at the top of the show. You're giving Caleb every chance to succeed in year 2. You're giving him a, younger receivers. Zaccheaus is 27. So it's not like he's, like a 25-year-old, like, going on to like just finishing his like first contract or whatever. Like, he's been with Washington like since he came back last year. So he started his career with the Falcons. So he's been around the block. He's not a brand new player, but he's also like, he had a nice season. He had 3 touchdowns, 506 yards. It's a good number 3 receiver. And you get to like fit more of what Ben Johnson wants at that position, which is speed. So I think that's, certainly does not limit what they can do in the draft. I thought Ryan Poles, left all options on the table, which is good that's the right approach to like say, this opens up our draft board. We can do whatever we want at 10. But I think even beyond 10, they'll have some chances to continue to add on the offensive side of the ball, to continue to be like, hey, Caleb, we're doing everything we can now. Like, because the narrative last year, which was just, technically BS now that we've seen it play out. Oh, this guy's entering the best situation ever for a rookie quarterback. Never seen it so great. People forget to look at like the most important position, which was the offensive line. People forget to look at like, oh, look, tight end room, not very good. Scheme, all those things. Now it feels like they're kind of righting the wrongs from like trying to like correct what the narrative was last year on this team and be like, oh no, actually now it is a good situation for Caleb.
Yeah, and that's what I love. We kind of started this on Caleb. It's all about him, and I would say with every one of the coaches brought in, it's all about him, right? Why do I bring in Eric Bieniemy? So there's an elite run game so that Caleb Williams can turn around and actually have a threat in the play action pass game. Why do I bring in Antoine Randall so receivers can catch the freaking ball when it's thrown to them and there's a touchdown right in their hands? And we saw a bunch of drop passes last season from Bears wide receivers, right? Like it just feels like the focus is so heavily, for the first time in my lifetime as a Bears fan, as somebody from Chicago, as somebody who's grown up just watching the quarterback position, the first time I've ever seen a all-out focus on this kid cannot fail. He has to be good.
Well, because they're not going to be the ones to allow that to happen. You know what I mean? Like, that's job preservation. That's doing right by your player. And everything they've done is reflecting the belief of like, no, we really love you. We really believe in you. So we're going to do all these things to show you that. But again, like, to me, it keeps coming back to they've done their part now. And there's the draft, there's second wave of free agency, all these other signings they can make. They've done their part. Caleb, it's on you to carry your end of the bargain.
But it's just that mindset, right? That is the Philly mindset. That is the Kansas City mindset. It was the New England mindset. At the end of the day, now New England maybe a little bit different because they were more defensive focused in the beginning, but some of those other teams, right? It's all about how do we make the quarterback's life. I know, Ben said we're not doing things the easy way, but how do we make it easier on him? Sure. How do we make it's so that he's not worried about the extra things that have to go into being a good quarterback while still dealing with all of the already difficult parts of the process of being a good quarterback? It's the first time in this franchise since I've been alive history that I've seen this kind of focus on the quarterback. And I think that does put the pressure on Caleb Williams to, hey, you got to show us something. And by the way, I'm not sitting here telling you playoffs are bust. I'm just telling you that by the end of this season, we have to know an answer.
Yeah.
I have to know Caleb Williams is the quarterback of the future.
I don't know. Like, we were just in this situation a couple years ago watching Justin Fields in year 2, but it was a completely different set of circumstances where he didn't have any of the infrastructure around him to be successful. It's like, how could you possibly be successful under those circumstances? For Caleb Williams, how could you not be successful under the circumstances now, at least, with what we know about this roster as it currently stands? Like, that's why I think, honestly, too, because of what quarterback contracts are for rookies, high draft picks, you have 5 years to get it right. It feels like we keep getting into like year 2 now, like the pivotal year 3 now has kind of become the pivotal year 2 for so many of these guys, because hell, you've seen it, whether it's, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, any of these guys, like Zach Wilson, that got punted on after their second season. Like, if you don't pan out, then I'm not suggesting that the Bears would do that with Caleb Williams, considering he was the number 1 overall pick. But my goodness, like the process now has been sped up to where, like, if you don't have an answer on your quarterback after year 2, you're in trouble going into year 3, because that just means that everybody's pressing with their decisions at that point.
And I love that you bring those names up, right? The quarterbacks from that class, the Mac Jones, the Zach Wilsons, the Justin Fields, none of them were invested in like this. Yeah. None of them were given the opportunity. It's why, right, when I look at the Trevor Lawrence situation, I could say confidently coming away, I don't think Trevor Lawrence is a very good quarterback. I feel like he's okay. He's going to have hot games. He's going to have cold games. But that second year of him down there, when they saw him kind of play well and they end up making the playoffs, they were like, we're investing in this guy. We believe in this guy. We're going to give him everything he needs. And then you still saw the goal line interceptions. You still saw the game-losing passes and different things like that. outside of that, you look at the rest of that class, and now they're all in different places, and it's kind of weird to see. But you just were like, well, if you invested in them like they at least tried to invest in Trevor down there, maybe you would get some wins where you're at. Caleb is getting the Trevor treatment. Caleb is getting the best linemen that are on the market. Caleb's getting surprise linemen. Nobody thought Joe Tooney was an option. So I think when you come away with all of that and just everything that this Bears team has built up, again, I'm not saying that it's, Super Bowl or bust here, but I got to know some kind of answer. And I feel like it's not too much in the modern NFL to ask, hey, do we know who this quarterback is after a certain amount of time, a couple of years into their career? This is not Drew Brees anymore. We're not living in the NFL
you don't have the time.
Previous was. You don't have that kind of time anymore.
Not with the way that, teams that do it right, if you can win with a quarterback on a rookie contract, like the Chiefs did, that's the model now that the rest of the NFL is trying to follow. And it's not easy by any stretch, but that's the model it's the blueprint. And the Bears are hoping that they have the recipe now to achieve that blueprint. Yeah,
and let's hope we get some answers. Was there anything else from the past couple of days that you took away from any of the players speaking, from any of the GM or coaches speaking that you felt piqued your interest a little bit?
Well, Ryan Poles said all the right things when it came to the pass rushers. Today he was asked about are you done adding after getting a new defensive end, a new defensive tackle, and he's like, we're paraphrasing. I know he said at the end, we're happy with where we're at today, but you can never have enough pass rushers. He pointed to the Super Bowl. He pointed to, you want waves of pass rushers. So of course, Bears fans are thinking, who else? Is that paving the way towards
Mason Graham?
Is it paving the way towards number 10, being a defensive end? He did say that the draft, the board's going to be open for them at that position.
Yeah.
I think that kind of leaving that little crumb out there is it's a smart strategy, because it shows if the Bears are still looking, maybe they can negotiate a price down. If there are other players out there that they'd like to add in the next, next couple weeks, whatever it is, whether it's the draft or not. I thought that was, he didn't shut it down completely. I didn't expect him to, but I thought the answer certainly piqued a lot of interest among this fan base.
And it just makes a lot of sense. There's too many pass rushers in this draft to not at least come away with one of them early on. Even on the offensive line side of things, you can look at some of the guys over there as well. But I think there's just so many pass rushers in this draft, either from the inside or from the edges, that you can come away with one of them. It's going to be interesting to see what the Bears do. As always, we'll keep you covered all season long here on the Chicago Bears podcast, all year long here on the Chicago Bears podcast. So stay tuned in with us. Hit that like button, subscribe to the page, leave a 5-star review. Y'all know what to do. We're going to get up out of here, man. For Courtney Cronin, it's your boy Pat the Designer, back at it again. Y'all stay safe out there, Chicago. Bear Don, one love. And Ben Johnson, my bad. I was unfamiliar with your game. Peace.